when I approach a movie or a book, anything literary that requires interpretation, I don't just approach it as a good book, right? Or especially in the classroom, I don't approach it as something that I just need to cover, right? I approach it as something that has a lot of hidden treasure.
Welcome to Inspiring Teachers, Episode 2. We're so glad to have you back. In our first episode, we discussed why we teach, and here today we have a special guest. Hi, I'm Danny Hauger, along with
Tavis,
and we have a very special guest today. Joshua Cauley is here. Joshua, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for being here.
I'm so glad that you decided to make the time for us, and it's a pleasure for us to really get to know each other even better and to understand kind of why we teach and what is it that brings us to this profession, and maybe something that we say might inspire somebody else out there. So that's kind of the goal, and today we're going to get started by just kind of wanting to know what brought you into teaching. Like, I know we've been colleagues for less than a year.
Right.
We've talked several times, but what brought you into teaching? What did you do before, and how did that begin for you?
Well, I think part of it is I come from a line of teachers. My grandmother was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. And then I found out recently that my family lineage comes from like religious scholars. So there's, I'm sure it's in my DNA.
Yeah, there's teachers there too.
Right? Yeah, it goes back a long ways. It was very easy for me, especially whenever I was I went to college and kind of moved back home in the transition period. And a good way to make money is just a sub. So kind of got comfortable in the classroom. And then I spent 2 years with a Christian nonprofit working in Belgium, and 2 years raising support for that because I had to make my own money, and then 2 years there, and then I met my wife who is from Oakley, and I wound up moving from Georgia, which is where I'm from, all the way here. Didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and thought that teaching would be something that I could do, so I did it. You know what I mean? I was kind of comfortable with that profession.
Right.
Anyways.
You had already had the experience of substituting in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so
I knew what it was like being in a school.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's try to unpack. That was a lot of information.
Yeah,
So
really
very
was a lot
No,
there.
it's great.
Yeah.
Did your parents and seeing them teach, was it in the back of your mind at all that might be something you would do growing up, or did you pull the opposite? Like, how did that influence your upbringing?
I didn't really think that I was going to be a teacher. I thought I was going to be a rock star. That's what everybody wants to be, right? I thought I was going to make it big.
Right.
And even when I came back from Belgium, I was on my way to Berklee School of Music, and I was going to be a session studio bassist. I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. It doesn't pay the bills.
When did that realization come for you, though? Or what? When did you? How far down the road did you go? Because you're an excellent musician.
Well, I try. I think. Probably when I got married and realized that I actually have to make money to pay for my rent.
I think we've all had a bit of the rock star dream in our
Right.
backgrounds, mine being even the circus rock star, but there's still that, glitz and glamour of the stage
Right.
and, being appreciated
People
by
always
the, exactly.
Yeah.
And once you get a taste of that, you kind of want it. And there is almost some parallels to having the rock star lifestyle and the teacher lifestyle in that you are on stage all the time.
Sure. With the rockstar lifestyle, most people don't actually make any money.
Right.
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 Which is sad when you're comparing it to teaching, which we notoriously don't make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting comparison. But there's definitely some sort of performance that goes into what we do. And there's a certain amount of entertainment in trying to captivate the minds, especially I would think in 2018, where the era of the attention span has to be considered shorter than the previous generation.
Absolutely.
So if you're not captivating, good luck trying to capture a majority of your classroom and inspiring imagination and interest in what they're teaching and trying to learn, right?
Right.
So that's neat that was a part of it for you, and you still will hobby and play and and hopefully do some recordings here in the future.
Right. And we can bring a lot from our backgrounds. In fact, I think it's a little better to have background that you can bring to the classroom. Especially if you had any experience on stage. There's so much, there's so many similarities.
I actually have my school, my degree is actually in biblical studies. I went to a Southern Baptist University, and we didn't take public speaking. We literally took a preaching class. Like, we learned how to get on stage and preach the gospel, And I mean, it sounds silly, but I find myself using a lot of those techniques, especially whenever you're teaching something that's kind of intense,
Right.
I call it my preacher voice. I kind of get into it, and then like everyone's really serious, and I feel like I'm preaching. It's weird.
I'd love to hear more. Like, what are some of the tools that they taught you?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I could. Well, some of them are kind of just general. It's good rhetoric, you know. So, for instance, you don't want to do this,
Okay.
right? You know, because it pushes people away. You know, like, you want to do this, welcome. Just a lot of control of the voice. Okay. You know what I mean? When to rise and when to fall. When to control the pauses. A lot of times, which you understand as someone who's in the theater, right? You don't just speak
right.
Monotonously and without pauses.
Right. There's got to be a dynamic nature
right.
to draw people in.
Yeah.
Just dropping those little pauses here and there and emphasizing. And also, remember, my background is more in physical theater and clowning, and the same vocabulary applies with your body as well. Sure. You can still do the emphasis with your body and pause for effect.
Right. Yeah. And I bet you do the same thing.
I definitely do. Yeah. Or I know I can feel when I'm amplifying the message, right? Or I can feel, you can be aware when your students are where you want them as far as, are they in the same emotional tone and mood that you are, right? Especially like you mentioned serious subjects. That's when I feel like you maybe are experiencing it the most. Something with a feeling of impact or a feeling of significance, and you bring them there with the way that you speak, with the way that you roll out material. And the pauses are so important.
Right.
Especially coming from broadcast too. That's something that you don't just want to rush through, even if it's a commercial that you're recording. Take a breath, let what you said stand out. And even sometimes saying less, being more. Right. And letting the impact of fewer words have an impact. So there's certainly parallels to all three of these kinds of backgrounds. Right. And I agree with Tavis that the more things that you have in the background that you can bring out and share with your students, the more interested they are in you. Right. And I have a feeling like, for me, that's incredibly important. Like, I don't know how, and I told them this, like, I don't know how many, I mentioned this in episode 1. I don't know how many of your teachers, when I talk to my class for the first time, are going to lay out your life story for you really quick, but I'm going to, because I'm letting you know, like, I'm all here. Yeah. And you can be all here too. Like, that's totally welcome. Whatever you are, whoever you are, affects who you're going to be. Right. So that's really neat.
At the beginning of the year, I do it every year. I write it's kind of a really dense letter of introduction. It's a whole page, and I try to make it complex. You know what I mean? It's probably right at their reading level, if not a little more. And that's kind of what I'm doing. Number one, I'm showing them that I'm actually a good writer. You know, because I teach English, and
it's good to have that, right?
Yeah, I want them. I say it tongue in cheek a little bit, but I want them to be a little bit intimidated of my skills, right? So that they don't think that I know less than they do.
You're setting the bar.
Yeah. But then a lot of it is what you're talking about, where I tell them where I'm from and the things that I believe. You know, so they're trusting me. Because if people don't trust you, then they're not going to listen to you when you try to teach
them.
Also,
I feel like that's so important. I had a big feeling of that jumping from middle school to high school, that I didn't want to feel challenged. I didn't want my authority challenged. So sure, I definitely will put out there, especially when I do have the breadth of confidence in something we're talking about, giving them everything I've got and letting them know, like. And you know what else I like to tell my students while I'm teaching is that I'm constantly continuing to learn. Right. I feel like that's another thing that's great to express, and that is probably good to share with our audience. Like,
and you teach them the learning process for you.
That's
and
right.
As a woodshop teacher, I'm always telling them that one of the most valuable resources that they have out there is YouTube. Right. I've learned a lot of the skills that I have, not just from my father, but also from just the resource of YouTube and all these videos and highly skilled people that are out there doing these types of instructional videos.
You've got the highly skilled, and Josh and I were talking about, you've also got the lesser skilled, which are also educational tools, right? To take videos that aren't great examples, right? Did you think I was calling you lesser skilled for a second?
I was on the border. No, I just forgot what we talked about.
We were viewing some examples to show of what not to do, and that's great too. And even all the middles, like I talk to my students about, even people that you might strongly disagree with, you could probably learn a technique or two from that could be beneficial. So all of those oral communication skills are important to all three of us, even though we teach English, social studies, and woodshop. Right. And we have taught different things in the past, correct?
I've taught science for many years. I taught elementary school as well. So I've been around in a lot of different subjects, which, again, having that going into the woodshop really helps me be a better woodshop teacher.
Right.
You talked about teaching your kids your beliefs in the beginning, right? You had that one. So what are some of your beliefs that you teach them?
I do a different focus every year. Okay. Right. So it depends on what I'm focusing on. This year, I think I actually focused on my college, where I came from, and my goal when I do that is to talk about how learning to read has had an impact on my life outside of teaching, right?
Okay.
Like how it's changed the way I view the world. I try to get them to see when I approach a movie or a book, anything literary that requires interpretation, I don't just approach it as a good book, right? Or especially in the classroom, I don't approach it as something that I just need to cover, right? I approach it as something that has a lot of hidden treasure that's in it, and you have to kind of dig the gold out. It's not just there; you have to dig it out. But once you have it, it's precious, right?
So they're not just reading something because it's assigned, or they're not reading something because, like you said, it's quote unquote good.
Right.
That good has a meaning.
Right.
So what is good mean?
Yeah,
and having deeper value.
The world is telling them something.
Right.
And it's a shame if people don't know what the world's telling them. Right. It's a language that people need to practice so they understand, and otherwise they're just watching Star Wars and thinking that it's Star Wars.
Right.
And they don't see all the really rich cultural meaning behind it.
I have one example in my teaching career that really stuck out for me. It was when I taught them what metaphor meant.
Sure.
And we were at the end of A Bridge to Terabithia. And I went through all the different metaphors that were brought about growing up and what the river represented and all these different things. And about half my class, their jaw just dropped and went, "Oh my God." And the other half were like, "What?" Like I got these ones, I didn't get these ones, but it was such an amazing feeling where it was so clear that they got that a story could have more meaning than just fun Star Wars, fun story about children, whatever it is. Yeah.
I was like, my example is always Willy Wonka and how I'm convinced he's a communist.
Right.
Because think about it. You have Charlie, who is poor, right? Doesn't have a lot of resources. He's the working class who gets all the prizes at the end. Then you have like the series of kids. You have Veruca Salt, who's greedy and wants everything, and so she gets thrown out. Augustus Gloop. His gluttony, which is a very rich person's sin, right?
Sure,
you can't be gluttonous if you're poor, right? And you have Violet Beauregard, and I think that all of them, the old movie kind of didn't do a good job of playing out her character, but she's overly competitive, right?
Okay.
The new movie really overdid it, but that's a capitalist concept, right? To compete against others and put them down, and you win. Mike TV, who is kind of engrossed in this entertainment culture, which again it's a kind of a capitalist thing, right? Sure. Like we make our money on silly putty. I heard somebody say that the reason that we beat the Soviets is because of silly putty and things like that, right? The Soviets would be totally offended about selling something useless. And we made millions of dollars on it. Those people got pushed out, and then Charlie wins the prize and gets to work in the factory with all the Oompa Loompas who sing together and work together in perfect harmony for food. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's a communist.
Just let that flow. So there's no smooth transition out of that. What was the first thing you taught, and what was the first level of teaching that you did after 7?
Oh gosh, are you talking about my first? The first thing I taught professionally, or
I'm wondering what your first
teaching experience,
your first classroom is that was your class. What was that?
It wasn't a classroom, but it was when I just graduated college. I was still living in my hometown, way in the middle of the sticks in Georgia. I worked for a church, and I was the bus minister. That was my job. And so we would go out and we would pick up kids to ride the bus and take them to church. But then once a week, we would go out and have these kind of after-school clubs and programs. And I developed kind of a curriculum and taught them. And it was half kind of Bible study and half like social living and after school program type stuff. Like don't bully people, don't get in fights, and save your money and stuff like that. You know.
Do you feel like you've brought some of those life skills into your classroom now?
I think what that did was we would intentionally go to really, really low income neighborhoods and actually go to the house. Like it was a trailer park. They were always in trailer parks, and it would be in someone's backyard, and sometimes it would switch. And I think that what I carried away from that was just you hang out with these people who are poor, and they're just people. You know what I mean? You can't really look down on them.
Right.
There might be some choices that they need to make that are better and all that. You know what I mean? But they're really no better or worse than I am. Right. Most of the time, they just have weird situations that put them in where they are. It's not like they're lazy or bad or anything like that. So now, whenever I have a kid who's poor, who's on the lower end of the economic spectrum, I feel like I don't look down on them like I might have done before, right? Because I know people in that situation.
Right. So it opened up your eyes to the many different stories of our students.
Sure, yeah.
And I feel like the more I learn about a student, the more compassionate I am as well.
Right.
Like, think about instances in the past where I'm like, why is this kid falling asleep in class? What's going on? And, I later find out that this student doesn't have a bedroom.
Right.
And that they sleep on a couch in the living room where the parents are partying all night. And it's like...
Not that happens to all of them. Because there's some that are just jerks.
Yeah.
But,
But it reminds me to approach them from a place of compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if they're jerks, then you still need to be compassionate, but it doesn't mean that they're not jerks.
So from there, how did you get into like a formal teaching role in a traditional classroom, like the setting that you're in now? When did that start?
That started just a few years ago. I think this is my 4.5 years teaching because I started mid-year. I was looking for something to do. I was working at a place called RES Success in Martinez. That's a day program for adults with developmental disabilities. So people with that are like on the spectrum, people with Down syndrome who can't really who can't hold a job, and so we had a day program that worked with them. That's not a great place to work in the long term, It's one of those jobs where you tell people and they say, "Oh, that's so noble." It's like, yes, but it's also not great. You know what I mean? It's kind of soul sucking.
It sounds like the 2 years I had at the Adult Rehabilitation Center working with people with addiction, and it is that sense of like, I'm glad I did 2 years of service.
Sure, yeah.
I'm glad I gave everything I had for a good cause for a while. But same thing as you. Maybe you came to a point where like I could stay here forever if I wanted to, and it maybe would make me a really dark person, and it might dampen my personality and my ability
feel
to
like you do the same thing over and over every day.
Sure.
And then I've worked in some pretty rough schools, and I know that I've felt that way. And so one thing I want to really talk about on this show is what do people do to kind of revitalize and re-inspire themselves to have the energy, and because we know we're doing such great work.
Right.
But sometimes it can be hard to get up in the morning and go and do it again.
Right.
What's something that you do regularly that helps inspire you that we might be able to share with our viewers?
I don't know if I've taught long enough to really answer that question well.
That's a very nice answer, actually.
We also we teach at Heritage is not known for being a rough school. You know what I mean? So we typically don't have a lot of the same problems. My first school was Black Diamond, that's here in Antioch, and that was known for being a rough school, and it still has problems today. I think thinking about how to revitalize yourself and how to get more interested in it, because you get bogged down in the behavior part of it, right? A lot of it is trying to figure out what is the actual root cause, because you find, and this is like a middle school thing, you find yourself talking about who passed the pencil to the other person, right? Or why are you putting white out on your desk or whatever, what I mean? All these really silly things, and it's just these power struggles, but really there's a deeper root issue. Some of it is deep and dark and like things with their parents, and some of it is just maturity. Yeah. Right.
It's just part of their developmental process.
So I think your question is, how do you get past that and start thinking about teaching, because I didn't get in the business of teaching to tell people to stop passing notes, right? I wanted to teach them about literature. And I think that when it comes down to it, is find ways to teach literature, right? Read a poem, to your class, and read it really dramatically, so that they feel the same thing that you do.
So you share something that you're passionate about.
Sure.
So your passion is then translated onto them. I know that for me, I feel like that the more passionate I am about a subject, the better job I do.
Sure, yeah.
And the harder it is to ignore.
Right.
I think that's a big part of it too. If you're up there, you watch someone who's really given it all, even to the point where it can be, if no one else is participating, almost embarrassing.
Right.
But you're willing to go out on that ledge out of a position of stability.
Yeah.
That's appreciated, I think, by more, not all, and very few things you do could get all. Right.
Yeah.
But it gets people to think a different way, and I think for me, the answer to that question is friendliness.
Yeah.
Right. I've always found it very difficult to be rude or scowl at someone who's smiling at you.
Right.
You know, unless it's an intentional. I'm trying to get you upset and smile on your face.
Sure,
right.
yeah.
But someone who's being genuine, being pleasant, is trying to be a friend, I think is going to get more likely to get a positive reciprocal response.
I think also it reminds me of some clown training that I had, where the teacher said to a student, I don't think it was me, it was another student that was up there, and they said, stop trying to be interesting and be interested.
Right. I think that's well
really
said.
good. That's a
And,
nice
and that's
piece.
one of those really important clown things that I've taken with me into the classroom.
Yeah. I know,
really nice,
because otherwise it feels cheesy.
Right.
Like,
Sure, exactly.
Like
You see a clown on stage trying to be interesting, and they're just mugging to you, and it's like,
Yeah.
And people can see through that.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
The teacher
And you
who-
might get a few chuckles here and there,
the
but it's
teacher
not.
who brings the chair in the middle and says, "So, was Shakespeare woke?" You know, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes because this guy is trying too hard. You know what I mean? Like, what was he? But what was he?
Sure. And you'll see that it's almost like a guest speaker that's come on, right?
Yeah.
Who's brought into a conference, and you're like, you start wanting to facepalm because that's not the authenticity that I think is effective.
Yeah.
That quote was great. I wonder if people out there who are watching, what is a phrase or a motto that you feel like is helpful in your teaching, or something that you feel like is helpful to your life? Led that is a little homework aside, but were you going to say something else about that?
Probably, but I don't remember what.
Okay. Let me ask you this question, Joshua. If you could have your students learn one thing from you that's not about literature or about curriculum, they leave your class at the end of a term, what would you like them to have walked away with?
I think the world is very interesting, you know, and I think that everything can be interesting if you understand it in the right way, you know. Even things that bore me now, like accounting. I'm very bored with accounting, but I know that there is a way to look at it that's very interesting.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that would be what I want my students to see. That just because they're bored by it doesn't mean that there's not beauty in it and value in it.
That's really great.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And it's true. If you can find the right tie-in, the right lasso, you can pull anything in to your classroom, right? Almost everything is relevant.
Right.
If you can find a way to make it so.
Yeah.
Just like in a job interview, a line on your resume that might not be relevant for the position, if you can find a way to connect those ideas.
Right.
So for accounting, I would try explaining to them your personal finances, right? Your ability to do your taxes effectively, to know the ins and outs and intricacies of code might actually benefit your family and yourself in the long run. We were talking taxes yesterday. And I said, here's the tip, like when you go negotiate your car, tell them the price you want, but tell them the price you want out the door, including tax, title, and license. It's going to be another $1,200 to $2,000, $1,200 to $2,000. And if you can get that worked in, put your hand out there, see if you can get them to shake your hand, right?
Yeah, with that though, they might not be interested in the financial part of that.
No.
But they are interested in the competitive part of that.
Sure.
Right? You know, if you look at it like a puzzle, then it gets a lot better.
What's the right combination of phrases and communication that gets the door unlocked for you?
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was, we're talking about inspiring teachers and how to be inspiring teachers. Who's a teacher that has inspired you? And we want to give shouts out to those teachers that have really helped pave the way for us to become inspiring teachers ourselves.
I have a few. One of them was an English teacher, Doctor. He wasn't a doctor. His name was Mr. Van Dyke. And it's really funny. I found out in the past year that this guy who I always held up on a really high pedestal was a beginning teacher, and he didn't feel super comfortable with what he was doing the whole time, you know. But there's something about him was really engaging to me. I felt like he was able to talk to us as relative equals. You know, he was always the authority, but I didn't feel like he was stuffy. You know, he taught me the prologue to the Canterbury Tales and stuff like that, and he had couches in his room, which was awesome.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
And then there's a guy, man, I can't remember his name, Dr. Craig something. I had him in college. He was an Old Testament survey class, and which sounds really boring, right?
But depends on how you look at it, right?
That's the thing, right? You know, that's the thing. You know, his class was so interesting, and that's the thing. Like we would go through these long genealogies, and he would point out the stuff that everyone would miss in genealogy. You know, there's a name in there And because that name is there, then the whole thing is broken, right? There's one person who is cursed way back in Numbers, right? And because that name is in this genealogy, then this person is cursed too, kind of thing. I'm making connections that I didn't know that I would make with these really stereotypically boring passages. And that was really powerful.
It's aha moments that I tell my students. It's better to have an aha moment than get the right answer.
Sure.
Because that aha moment is where you've learned something.
Yeah. And then there was Chip McDaniel, who just had a really great beard. Like he looked like you don't know who John Calvin is. He looked like John Calvin.
From Calvinism, right?
Yeah.
I'm aware of his work.
He was also famous for having a big beard.
Right.
So Chip McDaniel was awesome. He taught me Psalms. Yeah, I liked it.
Nice. I'm thinking about one. Maybe we can give a different one today too.
Yeah.
So, high school government class, Mr. Mooring, who called everybody a scrub, which I thought was such a great student diss because it's so gentle. Such a gentle jab. Oh, you didn't bring home? Oh, scrub. And it was great. It was funny and, just kind of meant like you weren't pulling your weight, right?
Sure,
you were scrubbing.
Yeah.
So he would teach us, not just that. That's just, I only like insults. He taught us about, it's the first time I remember learning the differences between political parties. And I never was able to figure out what his actual preference was. Right. And I think that's such a skill.
Yeah.
He was able to teach us, and this was in 2002, so we're talking right after September 11 and the year after and all the ensuing politics. And he was able to unravel all of it without so much bias that I could figure out where he actually stood. And I was always trying to find it. And he would always say, that's not what this is about. It's about teaching you foundations and where these parties came from and what their basic tenets are. And I just think that that's something that's could be more useful for everyone in today's society. Like being able to, let's just analyze and converse and never an argument, right? Just a conversation. And that's something I've tried to carry into my classroom where anyone's welcome to disagree. I encourage it. Like I want to hear both sides or we're not doing a good job. And more than that, there's usually more than two sides.
Right. Yeah.
There's usually many. So that's something that I appreciate from Mr. Mooring. So thank you. I'll find a way to get in touch with him. He's probably on Facebook these days.
Right.
How did you think of it?
Mr. Aloyan, middle school history teacher. I think what we really have in common with a lot of these is that these teachers were people. They didn't seem to put up the mask as much. And Mr. Aloy was very much in that same realm of just like, what's up, fool? How you doing, man? And he would tell us stories about his life. He always had a quote from a rock song or a philosopher or something on his board all week. And we would read that and we would wait in anticipation for Friday. Right. He might talk about it for a minute. He might take the whole period to talk about what that quote means. And he had some really deep, moving stories to tell from his life. And I've tried to emulate that in my class by picking quotes from just philosophers and musicians, and I never feel like I've lived up to the same storytelling skills that this guy had because it was just wonderful, and I should find him too.
That's great.
He was a pretty young guy, so he's probably still at Tuscadero Junior High.
That's great. He reminded me of something that when I was a kid and I would look at my teachers, I never felt like they were doing a job. I felt like they were doing something they loved. I never thought of them getting a paycheck and opening an envelope and having a bank account. I thought of them as just really good at what they did.
For all of them?
I would say going up, and maybe I was a little fortunate. At least K through 8.
There were a few that I could tell was just a job. And some of them, like, that was a job that you've had for a long time, and you don't really think very highly of it anymore.
And we want to stay positive on this generally and talk about inspiring teachers.
Sure,
but I remember a teacher just straight up the first day saying that he didn't want to teach this class.
Right.
And that has stuck with me to this day. I remember his name and what it felt like to be in his class.
Right.
Because on day one, he says, I don't want to teach this. I'm just doing this because I need to.
Why would you do that?
Right? Well, I think he wanted to be an art teacher, and he was put in a history teacher position against his will. That's what I'm guessing, because I had him for art, and he was actually a lot of fun.
It's just going to make a really miserable year,
right? Yeah, and it was.
Yeah,
it was.
So you had him for art, and he was
he was much better as an art teacher. So that's where his passion lay, Yeah. But part of being a teacher is exactly what you said, finding that passion no matter what. Because when I was teaching elementary school, there are subjects that I prefer to others, and I had a background in science and math, teaching it in middle school, and so I always got more passion whenever I taught science or math. But there were other things that, English, I had to find the passion in that, and I did, and I shared that moment where
he told me that, and I was offended.
Let's break that. I wondered if on the teaching tips side of things, you do something really great with groupings and how do you select student participation?
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk about that? Because I think everyone would benefit maybe if they have never heard of this.
Right. So I do a lot of collaboration. And I think that's kind of a trend in education right now, where we like collaborative things. I found myself, I would just call on people, and I would think it was random, but then I found out that I only called on the same few every time, right? Which is a problem. Some people fix that with the little sticks,
Sure.
equity
sticks. Yes.
Yeah. So what I did is I put colors on each desk. So every desk has a green, an orange, a yellow, and a blue.
They're in pods of 4,
Yeah, in
correct?
pods of 4, yeah. So pods of 4, and the groups are numbered too. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now I have 2 dice. I'm an English teacher.
2 die, right?
Yeah, 2 die. It's 1 die, 2 dice.
I think so.
It's 2 dice.
Is it?
And one of them is a 10-sided die. And the other, that's correct, 10-sided die.
Right.
And the
Going
other
back
one
to
is
my D&D days.
Sure,
I'm trying to
yeah, that's
remember.
where I got it from. That's exactly where I got it from. The other one, and I had to buy a D&D kit for this.
Right, the little clear box of it.
So
yeah.
a 10-sided die and a 4-sided die.
We lost him.
And I painted the 4-sided die so it coincided with the colors on the desk.
Right.
So now when I want to call on somebody, I roll the dice,
Okay.
and the blue person in group 9
Yeah.
is going right.
That's
I roll
a nice
it, and so it rolls a
do that.
9, and then the yellow. So it's just a random thing. And it seems like a small thing, but it actually helps a lot. I don't roll the dice. I give it to them, so they roll it, and then they actually have to stand up and take it to the other person.
Oh.
So like part of it is the kind of the kinesthetic thing, where they're actually walking, and the other one is like getting to know people.
Right, it's part of that community building. Yeah, you feel
and
like
then,
you're connected.
the other part is just it feels like a game,
Right.
even though it's not really a game.
But that's neat. It
Yeah.
does. It colors it up. It gamifies it. You do
Right.
something else with one student reports out, right? When they're doing group work.
Yeah.
And what's that? part
So
of it?
I'll roll the dice and find out who's doing it randomly. So the blue person, like it'll roll blue, and I say talk for 2 minutes, and then the blue person is going to tell me what the group talked about. And another part of that is that they have to keep track of all the discussions they take in class. I give them the topic of the day, and every time they have a group discussion, they have to actually take notes on that, and then I give them a grade on whether or not they did that later on.
Okay.
So they have to take notes on their individual groups, and then they have to take notes on what each other say. So take notes on what their group talked about.
Wow.
And then when someone across the room shares, they actually have to listen to what they said and write down notes from them too.
When you roll the dice, you call on that student. What do you do when they just say, I don't know?
It doesn't happen as much as you might think.
Okay.
When it happens at the beginning of the year. And then you kind of deal with that on an individual basis.
Right.
A lot of what I do is before I do it, I tell them like you might get rolled, and this it's random, so it's super awkward if you get rolled and you don't have anything to contribute.
So at the beginning of the year, they're still learning that they will be held accountable.
Sure,
but
right, yeah.
Eventually, they do.
And what I do with that a lot of times is I'll have them roll, and then they'll give it to somebody else, and I'll go back to them so that they know they can't really get out of it. What happens sometimes, because another thing I do is whenever I have a project, I don't read the instructions to them. They have to read the instructions, and they have to generate a question.
Okay.
So, and they have to generate multiple questions because someone might ask their question. If they don't have a question, I do this for any text that we read too. I actually have them ask me questions about the text.
Okay.
If they don't have a question for me, then I have a question for them, and then they really get drilled on the spot. You know what I mean? Because then they have to ask a question from the teacher that's often very complex and requires a lot of thought to think out on the fly.
Right.
Yeah.
But they recognize that they're going to be held accountable and to a high bar.
Yeah, you're gonna
you hold them to it.
And I don't want to be intimidating or anything like that, but you will give me something, right? I will finagle things so that you are participating in some way.
The zero opt out policy. You
Right.
can't just completely say I don't know and just sit in the corner.
Right.
You're a part of this.
Now, if you don't know because you're confused about something, then you can ask me a question and we can talk about it.
It's engagement.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
And it creates an atmosphere where participation, it's going.
Yeah.
Right.
You need to be ready.
Explicitly teaching that I find is very important. It's like, it's okay to not know.
Right.
But it's not okay to check out.
Sure.
It's like, in my world, it's changed a lot being a first-year woodshop teacher, but I get students that come to me and say, well, what's the next step?
Right.
And I say, well, you have instructions in your hand and you can go on the computer and watch one of the instructional videos that I made.
Right.
Now, if you come to me and say, will you help me with the next step?
Sure.
I will say, absolutely.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. There's a lot of good advice I think that a lot of teachers could benefit from the last 2 minutes that we just shared. If you know a teacher who you think could benefit from that skill, maybe forward the video along, share the link. Hey, it's been a really great conversation. I hope you'll come back and visit us in a future episode. There's another question that I'd like to just end on today is, so if we're about inspiring teachers, I think a lot of us were in our most inspired state at the beginning. For a lot of teachers, I would imagine the energy they bring, maybe not your best, maybe not your most informed, maybe not the most prepared, most educated teacher version of yourself, but the most energetic. You can only have the most energy at the start, I feel like, although many of my days I do come in pretty pumped up, pretty psyched. Right. So what's a piece of advice that either of you have for a teacher who's just about to walk into their classroom for the first time, or it's their first year, or they're in a new class subject? What do you want to tell them if you're looking at them right now? Let's start here.
I would say be genuine, be yourself, and build relationships with the students with that genuine self. And I know it's very hard to say go and be yourself, because if you're intentionally trying, you're no longer being yourself. But the best you is just you, and don't try to be anybody else.
That's very good. I like that a lot. And it goes to what we talked about earlier with the authenticity. Like you can see it when someone's acting, when someone's not performing. So along with that, I'll say do that and smile. Like, don't be afraid to come in and smile. I know there's times I don't feel like smiling, but I always want to at least start that class period with a smile and let everyone see it. Because, again, it's hard to frown in the face of someone who's smiling, and if you can create a happy atmosphere, even while you study topics that are serious or dark or dismal, I think you can find silver linings in a lot of places, and that's something that I try to do. So that would be mine.
So when I first started driving, I don't know if anybody else relates to this, but my dad told me to gauge where I am on the road by looking at there was a little bend in my hood, And the problem with that is that then I was looking right at the end of the hood. So I was looking right where I was going, right? And I wasn't looking down the road, and that's not very safe. As a new teacher, it's really tempting to do that. You look at what you're doing today, and you don't think about where you're going with it. And I think that a lot of times the students know that. So even though it's really intimidating and it's hard to figure out where you're going in the long term, it's a really good practice for new teachers to think about the end result. What do you want them to know when you are done with this? And then keep that long-term goal as the focus whenever they're doing day-to-day things.
That's great.
That's really wonderful.
This is
Thank
all
you.
some good teacher talk right here. This is some good stuff. We thank you so much for joining us on Inspiring Teachers. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and you can subscribe to us on YouTube and on Podbean. We thank you so much for joining us, Joshua, today, and Tavis for being with us as always.
Thank you for being
here. And we'll see you on the next edition. So in our comment section today, what's one piece of advice for a new teacher, or one thing you want to hold and improve on in your teaching? With that, class is dismissed, and we'll see you on the next edition. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yep.